Beep, beep. What is up, ninjas? My name is Sam World, and if there's one thing I know about music production is no matter how confident you feel like you know something, a lot of the times there's a lot more to learn. And I'm taking this video back to the basics, back to the Ableton Reverb, because the Ableton Reverb is very underrated. A lot of people say that it sucks. A lot of people think it's amazing, and some people just go like, hey, it came with Ableton, so it's whatevers, you know? You are paying $100 for Ableton, and then you're gonna go buy a $50 reverb plugin just so you don't have to use it. But again, guys, I feel like it's very misguided. A lot of people use it and they don't know what to do with it, and also they feel like what is it for, what is it good at, etc. So in today's video, we're going to be talking all about the Ableton Reverb. We're going to be talking about all the settings in it, which there's not a lot, but I think the problem with the reverb itself is that it really doesn't give you a specific thing of what it's for. It's not like a hall reverb or a plate reverb, etc. It's more of just like a reverb. So there's a lot of choices that we can do with it, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the theory in there, what you want to be doing, etc., in order for you to be able to execute it. As always, guys, if you want to support the channel, you can head over to evilsounds.com. And again, this video is also for me, so because I got to learn the Ableton Reverb all over again, and I learned some stuff I didn't know, which I'll say in the video as well. But with that being said, let's get straight into it. So here I have Diva's initial preset when you first open it up. Way better than Silence. And it has like this annoying 303 going. In Diva, we have this beautiful brassy kind of sound that you can manipulate in any way or form. So what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to be putting the reverb here on the insert. So we're not going to be using it on a return, just so that I can explain a couple of things, and then we'll talk a little bit about return versus insert at the end, even though I've made a video on this before. Okay, now when we open up the reverb, again, we're greeted by a lot of settings, and it's all captured into this rectangular box. And the first section that you always want to look at is top left, the input processing. So in this section, what we're actually doing is we're looking at the sound and we're EQing it as it comes in. So we're filtering it. And the importance of this part here is very, very, very important, because it's going to be able to give you sort of like a vibe. Like if you're trying to go more for a dark reverb, or if you're trying to go more for a brighter reverb. Now, along the way, we're going to go into the Diffusion Network, which is very similar to this, but this is going to be more of filtering for the diffusion itself, which is the long part of the reverb that you're going to hear. Again, so you can definitely have your input processing be like this and always make it feel darker. But again, from the start, we can kind of dial it in. Higher, mids only. So again, this is where you kind of decide if you want like a very dark, damp reverb, but I'll just leave it like in the center for namesake. All right. From there, we go to the right side, which this is one of those things that, again, you kind of see it and you're like, what the fuck is it? A reflection, and what the fuck am I going to spin it for? Is it like mid spin? Anyways, what this is actually doing, it's applying, might not be the correct way to quote it, but sort of like a chorus to the reflections, the early reflections. So if I put this at 100% and I move this towards the right top, so it's like a chorus that is being applied to the reverb. So if you're trying to create like a shimmering reverb effect, you have a saw and you want the reverb to sound sort of like a super saw, let's say, then this is where you would dial that in. Okay, now again, I call this a chorus in a way, and in most reverbs, like if you go into the Valhalla one, you're going to notice there's a modulation section where you can mess with the rate and the depth or the amount. It's the same exact thing. You're just putting a chorus, and that is going to be the rate of it. Okay, so that's where you're going to kind of input that. Now, in all honesty, I'll be honest with you guys, sometimes with the chorus on a reverb, I'm like, I don't know if it's needed. The most thing is you don't want the reverb to sound exactly like the lead, which I'm going to show you. So you use stuff like this to kind of muffle it a bit, and that's the point of it. Okay, now, the thing with the reverb that you have to realize, guys, is we have reflections and we have the diffusion part of it. So the reflections are going to sound like this. Okay, now as we're going from the reflections, we're moving away from that phase of the reverb. We're now going into like more of the longer part of the reverb, which is again the diffusion, which is going to sound. Okay. Now, the reason I explain that is because below the early reflections, we have the shape. So, you know, as a guy, some guys like bigger upper parts, bigger down parts, etc., right? Everyone has their own meaning of what beauty is. And with the reverb, we have a shape feature, which has nothing to do with that. I just thought it'd be nice to put it in there. Anyways, the lower the shape, guys, you're controlling the dynamics, the transition between your reflections to the diffusion, okay? So if you have a higher shape, what's essentially going to happen is the early reflections are just going to go straight down a little bit faster. And as you go slower or lower shape, you're going to have a slower transition. That's really going to change the vibe of it. So a lot of times what I do is when I'm deciding the reverb, I'll put the dry and wet at 100% and I'll move stuff around. Now, again, the shape was one of those things where I was like, what the fuck is it for? It's not doing anything, but it is. Here you can kind of hear the release on the hits. Like while on the right it feels a little bit more composed. You know, daddy decided to wear a tie today to work and whatnot. So again, that's where you kind of control that on the reverb. I'll be honest, you know, this is like little things with the shape, but I do mess around with it. Usually I tend to go more towards the right. Okay, now to the left of that, we have the pre-delay. Now, I don't think I need to explain this, but this one's simple. Essentially, you're telling the reverb, all right, as the sound comes in, how long does it take for the reverb to produce the reverb? It's in essence like, do. So if I have a high, low, instant, it's kind of attached to the sound. Now this is something really cool, the pre-delay, because you can get very unique with it. There was a question I got from this guy named Virtu a long time ago. I don't really talk to the guy anymore, but he asked me, yo, there's this effect in a deadmau5 song, and it sounds sort of like an echo or like a delay, but it's not an echo or delay. Do you know how to get the effect? And I remember thinking, you know what, I think it's just a reverb that has a very long pre-delay to it. So what that would sound like, check it out. So the reason that it kind of confused them a lot was, again, as you hear that, it sort of sounds like a delay to it, but it sounds like sort of like someone put the reverb at 100% in Serum, and it's like, I'm gonna make trap today, bitch, you know, kind of vibe. So that's something cool about the pre-delay. So you can do a lot of cool stuff like that. But again, in more retrospect, than using the reverb, not experimental, like the idea of the pre-delay is, again, you definitely give it space. But again, in a real life situation when you're in like a church and whatnot, if I scream like, Holy Father, resolve me of all my sins, you know, as I say Holy Father, the reverb just doesn't come on instantly with and attaches to it. You know, in that case, I'm one with God. No, it takes a little while for Jesus to hear and then give you the reverb, right? You know, it's like that little, like a little bit of holy water to repent and whatnot. You get the joke. You get the idea. It's just, again, a lot of the times, if you want natural space, you know, 1 to 25 milliseconds is where you want to be at. Anything higher than that sounds a little bit more unorganic, or that's a big ass cave that a hot dog can just fall into, and there's no end to it. But hey, we're just gonna bring back what we got. But anyways, that proves a point with the pre-delay, and a really cool thing to do. All right, guys, and with that out of the way, we're gonna move on to one of the most important parts of the reverb. You know, input processing, Diffusion Network is, and also the size of the reverb. Okay, now the size of the reverb is gonna give you, in essence, the feel for it. So higher sizes will usually be like halls, churches, and whatnot. Those are usually gonna be more distant. It's gonna add more depth to the sound, and it's gonna give you the traditional reverb that most people want. However, lower sizes are gonna have more like room plate vibes, so it sound a little bit more metallic. And in essence, it's gonna sound like what we did with the pre-delay. You can kind of say there's more high frequencies to them, but again, it sounds more like a chorus, it kind of plate effect to it, while a higher size will push the sound more to the back of the. So you can kind of see the difference. Lower the size, more in your face, more plate, more metallic, and the higher the size, a little bit more depth. It's more in the back. It sounds like the sound is playing and there's like a big ass cave behind it. So again, it's very important that you decide what size you kind of want to go for from the get-go. So what kind of reverb you're going for. Just a little kind of quick thing, if you want to put it on a synth, etc., analog sounds, usually hall reverbs are the way to go. Plate reverbs, great for vocals, etc., right? But again, if you can go with lower sizes, you can get experimental with it, as you can see. But traditionally, if you're using Valhalla and stuff, you probably want a bigger size. That's usually what most people are running in terms of like these kind of sounds. Okay, hopefully that makes sense, and I know it does. So from there, bottom we have stereo, so that's just how wide the reverb is. You can put it down the center, and you can make it hella wide. What I usually like to do with the stereo is, if I'm going to have a very monophonic mix, what that means is a lot of the sounds are coming straight from the center. It's always awesome to have like the reverb be in the stereo signal. It just sounds fucking great. It sounds like you know what you're doing, you have composure, everything's controlled. On account of, if you have like wide ass sounds all over the place and there's really no fucking drive to it, and then you have reverb wide too, then it sounds a little messy. So again, that's what this button is for. Very important. It just widens it more. 100% natural, 120. You're going to push that cunt all the way there. All right, so from there, we have our decay time. So the question I get asked a lot is, Sam, what should my decay time be? And this is a very hard question to answer, but I'll give you guys my theory behind it. If you're going to be playing a sound every 1/16 or every 1/8, then you can go with a very, very low decay time, because the reverb's constantly activating. So the cool thing about this is, when you go low and you have a high wet value, it doesn't muddy up the mix, because you don't have a long decay time. Every single note's creating a reverb chain that's just like, okay. However, if I have really high decay time, it really starts to get messy, so you got to be really careful. So usually with decay times, what I tell my students and what I tell people that I teach or advise is, always try to keep decay times in conjunction with the sound that you're putting in it. So if you have, like, let's say a lead or like a bass shot in techno, right, that goes bwomp, when's the next time it plays? If it takes 4 bars, a bar, 2 bars, whatever it may be, from there you decide how long that reverb tail's gonna last. So bwomp. Do you want the reverb to, like, do you want to give the sound a little bit of sustain? Go with a little bit of higher decay time on it. It's, you know, so if, for instance, what I mean is, as you can see that. Okay. However, if you're going to be having a R, there's no reason to have a very high decay time, because you're constantly activating it. Okay. The question is, again, if you're trying to create more of a pad with the delay or atmosphere with it, then again, there's other factors that come into play. But if you just want to put the sound and you want to give it a nice delay that makes sense with it, decay time should be, essentially, it should correlate with how often the sound is playing. So if you have a lead going, ba, 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 bam, 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 you know, every 1/4, let's say, then you probably want a low decay time, like a second or 2. If it's only going to play once and you want to make it bleed into the drop, then you would go with higher. Again, it's common sense to an extent, right? But again, those are kind of things to look out for in terms of theory. Okay, from there, up above, we're going to have another very important section, and that's the diffusion network. Now, the diffusion of the sound is going to sound like this. Essentially, it's the long part of the sound. It's the part that most people think of when they think of a reverb. If I tell what's a reverb, most people would say this is the reverb. They wouldn't tell me this is the reverb. They would say that's a fucking delay or like a new sound, right? No, but that's the main part of the reverb. So you're EQing that. So, you know, obviously here what I would want is, if I know I don't want lows, reverb lows, then I would get rid of that. From there, if I feel it's too bright, then I would lower this down. Now, as you notice, as I'm doing that, there's still a bit of high frequencies there. So you gotta be really careful, because as you can see, due to my input processing, the reflections are still kind of have all of that highness. Again, the diffusion network, I'm EQing the diffusion itself. I'm not EQing the early reflections. So that's very important. So from there, I can... Now from there, you can kind of see the reverb's nice. I like it. It's just that the sound itself has this very nasty thump in the middle. And then I'm just playing with the diffusion network. Again, I get what I want. So it's really important that you understand what kind of reverb you really want. Like if you want the reverb to be wide and open like trancey like that, or if you want it to be more dark and damp, more Anjuna deepish, then again, that's where you're gonna mess with that, okay? Now from there, to the right of that, we have the chorus. Now this is another, again, sort of similar to the spin, but it's just gonna apply. To the diffusion, as you can see. So this chorus is for that. Then you got your early reflections. Now I will say this. You know, there is a change from the reflections into the diffusion, so this will affect to an extent. But again, diffusion, chorus, get the idea. It's like a spin for that. Okay. Now to the bottom of that, obviously here we have reflection, diffusion, volume, so you kind of get the idea of that. Bottom of that, density and scale. Okay, this is the density of the reverb. So if you want a thick reverb, you know, thick daddy kind of vibe, or if you want a thin vibe to it. So if you find like your reverbs are sounding a little too fucking heavy, like they're too muddy and shit, then you might lower this down. If you find that you want it to have more depth and not sound so similar to the sound, then you would put a higher density. To the right of that, we're going to have the scale. Now, I'll be honest, I still don't know what the hell the scale does. It does change the sound, and you can hear it. According to Ableton, you can see it says, this controls the coarseness of the diffusion. Higher values tend to produce a darker sound. What I find with the scale is if I use it at lower values, it sounds a little bit more like loose, more high frequencies. The higher the scale, it sounds a little bit more refined, more composed, and again, I guess not as like shimmery, like but more like boom, 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 but not. So there's a change with it. So I usually like to use it more towards the right. And finally, guys, the last three settings we have on this reverb can be really useful if you're using the reverb to create atmosphere. And that's the cool thing about this that a lot of people don't know, is that in the Ableton Reverb, you can freeze the reverb. And Ableton says it's more just for like, you know, kind of auditioning the reverb. But what I like to do with it is I like to grab the reverb and create atmosphere out of it, because this atmosphere is going to fit your song most likely because you're using an existing sound from the song in order to create it. So for instance, here, we're going to play the reverb. And let's say I like that. There we go. From there, I can essentially, you can like filter it in. You can do a lot of really nice stuff with it. Okay. Now, the other thing is that below that, we're going to have some settings for it. The cut prevents the sound from adding to it, so it freezes automatically. However, if you have the sound still going and you have the cut off, it's just going to keep adding to it. Okay, and with the cut on, it just prevents it from adding more notes as you play it out. We might want to do like a freeze to kind of like transition into the break and etc. From that, we have the flat. So with it on, it bypasses your diffusion network. However, if I put it off, the reverb still has this EQ that we've added to it, everything. So it maintains that. So that's what I'm hearing now. That's the reverb. So again, if you hear that, you can kind of go like, wow, that sounds like really good atmosphere. You can use it for your song like that. You can see it bypasses it. Okay, so from there, now knowing all that, you should be able to kind of create a reverb that you like for this. So for instance, in the sound, I'm going to go, okay, we're going to reverb the sound. I'm going to go high quality on it. I forgot to explain what that was. But again, eco is just going to sound a worse reverb. It's meant for preventing CPU, obviously, overdoing if you're using a PC. You know, I got a Mac, so I go high quality every day. That's how I am. High all day, all night. I want a reverb that's very bright. Let's say I have it in a song, so I'm going to go with a lower size. I don't want the bottom part of the part of the sound adding to the reverb, so I'm going to move the input processing a little bit more to the right. pre-delay. From there, you want to add chorus. I really don't want that chorus on the sound. I feel like it kills the original, and it just doesn't. I don't want the shimmer. I'll add it like so. From there, the shape. I like the shape more to the right. Again, it sounds a little bit more like composed. I want more of a slap reverb, so that means it attaches to the sound and there's no like overall like being produced. Since it's mono, I'm gonna have it at 110 around there. There we go. And then from there, density. A little bit more to the right, because as you can see with the lower density, you can hear like a echoes to it. So I want more thick. Yeah, I prefer low decay time. The main reason is that one of the best advices I ever got when it came to reverb is that the reverb doesn't need to be present. You don't need to hear the reverb. It doesn't need to be like, reverb, I'm here, hey, bitch. No, the reverb should be like, you hear the sound and you're kind of, does that sound have reverb? It adds a nice taste to it, as you can see. It doesn't need to be heavy and muddy and messy. That's one misconception I see a lot. Everyone puts reverb and they're like, it needs to fucking be like, in your face. Yeah, for certain songs, but majority of the stuff if you're making like music, you don't want a lot of reverb because it will muddy up your song. So I think I'm good with this. Notice how it accentuates the sound. It doesn't muddy it and it doesn't push it to the back of the mix. It's just nice, tight, and it's right there. Guys, that's going to be the tutorial on reverb. Hopefully you found this helpful. And if you did, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell if you want. You know, I try to provide information to you guys that you can actually use. And whenever I explain stuff, I don't want to explain like the size makes it, you know, higher size, more hall, lower size, more play, yep, move on. No, I want to make sure that I'm teaching you guys why you would want to use these features and what they're for and how they all add up to give you the reverb that you're going to want to use. With that being said, I'll catch you guys for another video next time. You guys have a good night, good evening, good morning. Peace out.